I think I'm just going to tell the story, and we're not going to do the whole worship thing. But before we tell this story, let's sing on the bottom of the Jesus Loves Me hymn sheet for the Zacchaeus story. There is "Come by here, my Lord, come by here," which is Kumbaya. So let's sing that together. It's behind the script, but there you go. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Oh Lord, come by here. When we sing "Come by here," we're getting ready to hear one of God's stories. And this is the story of Jesus and Zacchaeus. Every year, the people of God went to God's holy city, Jerusalem, to celebrate the feast of the Passover. And at Passover, they remembered how God had brought them out of slavery into freedom. And on his way to the Passover feast, Jesus was going through Jericho, and many, many people wanted to see him. Zacchaeus lived in Jericho. And Zacchaeus was a tax collector. And he sometimes took money that didn't belong to him. And he wanted to see Jesus. But he was having a hard time because he was very short. And the people wouldn't let him through to see Jesus. So he climbed a sycamore tree so that he would be able to see Jesus. When Jesus came to Jericho, he stopped in front of the tree where Zacchaeus was. And he said, "Zacchaeus, come down out of that tree, because I need to stay at your place today. Zacchaeus was so happy. He had to come down out of that tree. And as they went back towards his house, the people mumbled and complained. Why is Jesus going to Zacchaeus' house? He's a bad person. He takes money that doesn't belong to him. And Zacchaeus said to Jesus, Jesus, I will give half my money to the poor, and if I've taken anything that doesn't belong to me, I will give it back fourfold. And Jesus said to Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus, today you are saved. You are right with God, and you are right with people. And then Jesus said to the whole crowd, I have come so that the lost may be found. So, we could do wondering questions. But that's the Zacchaeus story. And just one thing, one of the things I actually realized after I developed some of the stories is that both this story and the Good Shepherd story talks about, in the Good Shepherd story, they talk about Jesus knowing the sheep by name. And in this story, Jesus knows Zacchaeus' name. You know, he calls him by name. And then he talks about being saved and found again, you know. So I think in some respects, they both kind of key on that experience of Alzheimer's as being a little bit lost, and, you know, sort of provide a message of Jesus coming to find us and to keep us safe.
I thought at any moment you were going to break out in song with Zacchaeus was a wee little man.
Well, you know, actually, if you look at the script, I do suggest that after the story is told, that, you know, you can read the story in the Bible, which I usually, actually in the Good Shepherd story, I usually read John 10, you know, I am the Good Shepherd, but I in getting everything together today, forgot to bring my Bible, so I didn't have it. And so after you read this story, then you do read from the Bible. So, you know, we read it from the Bible, and then I say, and you can also sing the story. You know, so trying to find lots of different ways in to kind of, and some of them will know that song and some won't. But, you know, it has motions, and it's kind of, it's just another way into the story. And actually the opening hymn for this worship is Jesus Loves Me, which, you know, is in some ways a children's song. But, you know, when I sing Jesus Loves Me, it's kind of nice to be reminded of that.
I think it's in the hymnal too now.
It is in a lot of hymnals.
Yeah, I think it's in the hymnal.
Yeah. So, you know, these messages work in many levels. which is why I was saying to Carol earlier, I thought that a worship service with both people suffering from the disease and their caregivers would work. And this was sort of an example of, I need to practice the story a little bit more. One of the things I realized, I didn't have quite enough room to do what I needed to do here, and I was having trouble with, you know, yeah, you know, it just, and it's, you know, it looks really simple, but to really do it well, you really have to think through where you want people to end up and what you need to do to get them there in the most economical way possible. And I didn't do this perfectly, but that's okay too. I mean, does, you know, but yeah. Carol.
Have you ever had someone that is a participant want to manipulate the?
You know, I haven't had much of that, but it certainly would be a possibility, particularly at the end, you know, to just, if people were looking, interested. In most of the places I've done this, I haven't been, it just hasn't physically worked out very well. I mean, sometimes you're limited by the spaces that you're in. And, but I know in the children's version of this, after the wondering questions and the Bible reading, there's a place for response where the kids have choices of different kind of art, or one of the things that they can do is take the story tray and manipulate the figures, retell the story, you know, work on it from their perspective. And so it certainly would be an option if there was, you know, it really works well if people are around a table.
Yeah.
But if they're not around a table, they don't really have a place. So that's, because if they were around a table, I mean, one of the things you could do, particularly if you had time to hang around after you told the story, is sort of put the things out in the middle and just, you know, and let people touch them. Or,
I'm impressed how you cut those figures out. How well you did.
well, yeah, I worked really hard on this. Actually, these figures were made by some men in the woodshop at the retirement community where I worked.
Cool.
And the guys in the woodshop here are actually starting to make some for me. And we haven't quite gotten there yet, but I think I might actually eventually have kits to sell, which would make it much easier to start doing something like this, because you wouldn't have to find somebody to make them for you.
Can you show us the back of the tree?
The back of the tree is basically the same thing, but it's just got a notch cut out so that Zacchaeus can fit.
So maybe this is not the right time for this question. Why did you select three-dimensional solid figures contrasted to a flannel graph figures?
Mostly because I'd seen this done as children worship stuff. And I know Sonia, the person who developed it for children, just really felt like the three-dimensional figures added something. I can't tell you all of the reasons that I know in the children's worship. For any stories of Jesus like this, they use three-dimensional figures. When Jesus told parables, they tended to use flat figures because they sort of felt like, and they put the parable stories in gold boxes. And when they started to tell a parable, it was, you know, parables are treasures. And we keep them in these gold boxes, and then they And partly it was because, you know, it was kind of a teaching thing for children to, and the difference was between a story that had actually happened as opposed to a story that was a parable that was sort of made up. For people with Alzheimer's, that just seemed, you know, and the original Good Shepherd story in the children's version was not three-dimensional figures, it was flat, because it was a parable. I decided we needed to do it with the three-dimensional figures, because it just seemed to make more sense to me.
It brings it more to life.
I think it brings it more to life. It's easier to see. I mean, when you do like a flannelgraph thing, you have to practice, and you know, and it's colorful, and it. We have people who are actually bringing flannelgraph and using it with our assisted living folk, kind of doing a Bible study and telling Bible stories, and they were having great fun with it. So that is another way. I really like to experience the way I experience the stories in the three-dimensional world that Sonia created when I saw her doing it. And so I decided that.
This is something you can really touch.
Well, and it's something you can touch, and I think because it's,
Solid or something.
there's a solidness about it, and there's depth. There's just more dimensions. I think it gives you a little bit more to focus on.
I wondered about your pacing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's nice and slow. Is that better?
I think we all need to slow down. It's the spiritual discipline of kind of, you know, and I think when we slow down and we're with a group of people with Alzheimer's disease, our being slow and centered helps decrease the anxiety in the room, because they know just sort of on an instinctual level that they can trust what you're going to do. And I think, you know, and part of the issue with the disease is that it affects your ability to process information. So you do it slowly, you speak relatively slowly, and then you move the figures. And I know one of the temptations that I have when I'm doing this is I want to move them quickly, you know. But it is sort of, it provides sort of a meditative space if you can just do it slowly. Now, I'm not going to tell you that they're going to be glued to what you're doing 100% of the time. I mean, that's probably not going to be the case. But there is a sense, I think, that they're constantly being invited into in this world, and you just want to take it slowly and allow, you know, speak and then move, and just kind of keep following that pattern, so that if they don't get the words, all of them, then the action continues the story. So and it's basically one of the things that Sonia talks about in her book is that we use different parts of our brain to watch and to listen. So, you know, it's allowing access into two different parts of the brain, and one may be working better than the other, and you're not asking them to use both at the same time. So it allows for more focus.
A question. You've used the term processing words several times, and that got me to thinking about people who have aphasia. Do you any experience of using this with people that say have
You know,
strokes?
I haven't.
What do you think?
I think it might be, it might work.
I have a question only in that I notice when you're doing a story, your eye contact is to your down. And is that, obviously it's on purpose because you're doing it, looks very deliberately. And so is that reasoning to get the people out here to focus down? Okay. And then when you ask the wondering question, you look up.
Yes.
Because, you know, if you're a speaker, you're always so trained to look to the people
Yes.
you're talking to. So that I saw immediately, I go, well, she's always looking down. And I was wondering the reason or the rationale is for them to do the same focus, I take it.
Yes, it's, you're inviting them into this sort of world that you're creating here. And I think the three-dimensional figures help with that sense of you've created a world here. And you're inviting people in to experience it. You know, so often when we preach, we tend to preach concepts. And conceptual, not concrete language just doesn't work at all. If I'm looking at you, you're tending to look at me. And I know that there were some folks who worked on, some of you heard this, but some folks who worked on an Alzheimer's worship program the year before I did through the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. And they were very convinced that you could not do this with people with Alzheimer's because to do a worship service with Alzheimer's, you needed to be drawing them in using your eye contact, which is the way we normally do it. And I know, and what I've discovered is that, you know, it's really exhausting. Because, you know, you're providing all the energy and you're working on keeping them focused on you. And in some ways, this is a little different. You know, you're focusing on the story in the hopes that they will focus on that story. And in some ways, it's sort of allowing God's Spirit to work and not quite so dependent on your ability to be the vivacious leader that's going to keep everybody looking at you and focused.